The Maryland Science Center is a big glass and brick building, sitting at the edge of the inner harbor. You can recognize it by the weird twisty metal sculpture out front, and the dinosaur skeleton staring out its window. 500,000 visitors come here annually, looking to learn. And today, I'm here. I'm looking for something too. I'm looking for what I know must be missing when I read the statistics on how few young Americans are going into science and technology fields. Something that I didn't always see at my old high school, and certainly didn't see in the inner-city Baltimore elementary school, where I once helped a kid fill out a worksheet on the sun and what passed as science enrichment. What I'm looking for is a reason to love science. And I'm not talking just, oh yeah, I watched Shark Week on the Discovery Channel once. I mean, like, really love it. So much so that you're willing to take classes in 4 different disciplines at once, even though it's not at all required for your major, so that you could talk about the philosophy behind the scientific process for hours, so that you sometimes think up really great ideas for experiments, instead of falling asleep. Because that's about where I am in my life right now, and I want to know how I got here, and how more people can get here with me. School does not do science justice. It isn't all about plotting data points on a piece of graph paper, or using the if-then-because format to write out a hypothesis, or memorizing the diameter of the sun. Part of it, the best part, is all about the quiet thrill of observation and inspiration. Like Darwin noticing that this finch had a different beak shape than that finch, or Newton realizing that something had to cause the apple to fall from the tree, or Archimedes running through the streets soaking wet when he noticed that he had displaced water in his bathtub. There's a side of science that isn't about memorizing or even quantifying the universe, but about simply observing it, noticing something, with a question in your head. Simple, pure inquiry. It's the joy of this inquiry that makes the dry part of the scientific process worth it. And so today I'm all pure inquiry. I go into the Science Center, without plans, without contacts, without anything except a pair of eyes, a place to take notes, and hope that I'll find what I'm looking for.
By the late spring, the baby
Entering the Science Center is like stepping into Narnia, a Narnia full of giant dinosaur statues and simulated volcanoes, with David Attenborough talking about jellyfish swarms in the background. For a few minutes, I'm completely sucked in by how interesting everything is. I wander around between the little alcoves of information. There's a table full of sand and wind that shows how dunes form. There's a computer logged onto a hurricane database. There's a big lizard eyeing me from its tank. It's like a weird, magical land where everywhere you look, something is awesome. The atmosphere is completely immersive. That's my opinion, at least. But is this place as compelling to the younger visitors as it is to me? I look around. Over there, a few kids are at the paleontology table, brushing sand off of fake fossils. They're quiet, completely absorbed in what they're doing. Over in another corner, a trio of siblings are playing with a tornado chamber. They're laughing and yelling at each other as they climb around in this big plastic cylinder full of whirling white fog. They can actually touch the fog tornado. They can stand inside it even. The Vancouver Science Center, where I went as a kid, had one of those. I always thought it was the coolest thing ever.
but enough will survive to form swarms of their own.
Up on the second floor, there's an exhibit called Newton's Alley. You can't miss it, because even if the eye-searing colors don't catch your attention, the noise will. Bells, chimes, clattering metal, and each noise, each brightly painted object, each rolling ball and flashing light is there to teach you a physics concept. There's this apparatus that you can sit on that allows you to lift your own body weight with the help of pulleys. There's a cauldron full of smoke, and you can stick your hand inside and see how it affects the air currents. A crowd of children are taking turns to put colorful balls into the top of a giant Rube Goldberg machine, and screaming with delight as the balls fly down the track. The entire museum is like this. Everything is interactive. Everything is eye-catching, interesting, fun to look at, fun to mess with. There are flaps to lift up, mirrors to look in, buttons to press, and levers to pull. It makes sense. If you want to appeal to children, why not make everything into a toy? Kids touch everything. At one point, I'm standing next to a crab tank, politely looking at the animal inside like a good, respectable 19-year-old, and this kid, probably like 6 or so, comes up beside me and immediately presses his hands against the glass, staring at the crab while he subconsciously pats and strokes the tank. And the longer I stay at the Science Center, the more I find myself pressing buttons, pulling magnets, and feeling the immensely satisfying texture of a model of the Milky Way. I see a dad put his hands into the cauldron full of smoke, swirling it around and then throwing a handful at his son. I see a mom picking up a box and shaking it, and telling her husband how amazed she is that a pound of dirt on Earth only weighs that much on the moon. The Science Center is designed to milk people's natural tendency to mess around with things. If you want to know about levers, they're not going to make you read a boring piece of text or show you a video. They're going to build a gigantic lever and fulcrum and stick it in the middle of the room and let you use it to lift up your friend. You can see it, and you can use it, and it's really cool. Okay, so the Science Center is loud and colorful. It captures kids' attention and encourages them to ask questions. But now I have to ask myself, is it actually teaching kids science? Will any of these children actually remember the names of Jupiter's moons or all the organelles in a cell? Does the Science Center actually improve kids' science skills? Or is it all just fun and games? I end up asking this elderly volunteer for her opinion on the Science Center's work. 15 minutes later, I'm sitting on a stool beside her listening to her talk about pressure as she raises and lowers small children on a bed of nails. It's a most interesting experience. She talks about how some kids like science and some kids like art, and that's okay, and how important it is to combine learning with fun. She's talking about how she always asks the children questions about the answers to her questions, when she suddenly looks at me and asks me what causes gravity. I kind of stare at her, because that's a really hard question. Like, I think it has something to do with the warping of space-time, but, I don't actually know. So I take too long, and she tells me that it's because the Earth is rotating. I'm too polite to say anything, but gravity does not come from the rotation of the Earth. Gravity is a force exerted by every object in the universe on every other object in the universe. It has nothing to do with whether or not that object is spinning. If she's been telling kids that gravity is caused by Earth's rotation, she's been misinforming them. But the thing is, does it actually matter? How many of the kids will actually remember what she said about gravity when they get home that night? I hypothesize that it's a small percentage, especially relative to the number of kids who, never having wondered about gravity before, just benefited from the simple asking of the question. That said, it's not like the Science Center is running around spewing misinformation into kids' ears for the sake of loud noises and pretty colors. I talked to a man sitting at a table full of rocks, and he tells me that the Science Center does try to provide the answers to the questions that they inspire in children. Otherwise, he says, the kids would go home frustrated and might not ask questions again. This reasoning suggests that the important thing is that the kid gets an answer. Whether the answer is actually right is less important. Misinformation can be corrected, but if a kid gets fed up with inquiry, he'll never care about science again. I see a kid, probably 10 or 11, watching a presentation on the solar system projected onto a giant hovering sphere. At one point, he cries out, "Dad, did you know that 1,000 Earths can fit inside Jupiter?" I kinda doubt that kid will remember that little fun fact a couple weeks later. But does it matter? If a kid wants to know how big Jupiter is, there are plenty of ways to find out. 7th grade science, for example, or the library, or Google. But if a kid wants to know why he should care about Jupiter, Google won't tell you that. But this kid I saw, he knows that he should care about Jupiter because Jupiter is super cool. And he knows so because he saw 1,000 Earths fit inside of it at the Science Center, and it was so awesome that he had to tell his dad.
Ceres is by far the largest of the asteroids, measuring only 1,000 kilometers.
So that's all well and good, but there's still a problem. Namely, the Science Center isn't free. So how accessible is it really? What if you can't afford it? What if your parents don't care enough about science to bring you there? Can it still do you good? The first person I talked to this morning was a young woman wearing an education badge over by the tornado chamber. She told me that she thought parental interest was a big factor in whether kids care about science or not. Most of the kids she sees are homeschooled. The elderly lady working the bed of nails also had a message of science in class. When she was growing up, somewhere in the Midwest during the war apparently, she went to a school where the teachers weren't very good and there were not enough books for all the students. That still happens today, she said, and children who go to schools like that aren't going to get a good education. I asked her if there was anything the Science Center was doing to help those kids, and she told me that there was a van. A quick look at the Science Center website explains everything. The lady was talking about the Traveling Science Program, which is a van of people who go to schools and libraries and put on a science show. There is, however, a fee for a visit from the van. But there are other ways in which the center has tried to reach out. Admission is discounted on the first Friday of every month. Basic admission is free for all Maryland students and chaperones on field trips, and for teachers visiting with or without their classes. The Science Center's Dr. H. Bentley Glass Scholarships, which consist of $1,500 and a paid summer internship at the Science Center, are awarded annually to 2 Baltimore City public high school students who intend to pursue post-secondary education in science, technology, engineering, or math fields. The center seems to be trying to spread its influence further into Baltimore than its little corner of the Inner Harbor. Are its efforts paying off, or is it still only a specific subset of people who are benefiting from the center's existence? In an ideal world, I would have been able to do some crazy survey of Baltimore school children and make some pretty graphs out of the data.
Beautiful Saturn.
But for now,
Saturn's
all I can do is
atmosphere first
wonder.
appears to be serene, but this planet too hides power.
As I'm waiting for the bus to take me home from the Science Center, I start sorting through what I saw. It's time for me to figure out what I've learned and what I still don't know. I've come to the conclusion that the Science Center has done an outstanding job of making science awesome. It's cool, it's exciting, it's interactive, you can see it and hear it and touch it, and that's what kids like. That's what I like. That's what humans like. We like to be shown something interesting and allowed to explore it. Like that guy at the rock table said, it's a natural way of thinking that just has to be nurtured. That said, I have no way of proving that this fun discovery actually translates into academic interest in science. In order to answer that question, I would have needed to talk to the children at the center, which I really didn't feel comfortable doing, seeing as every parent was already giving me funny looks since I was alone and over the age of 12. All I can say is that during my visit to the dinosaur and volcano Narnia, I saw kids fascinated by science. I saw them delighted by the way sparks jump between 2 pieces of metal. I saw them concentrating as they brushed sand off their fossils, imagining that they were paleontologists investigating the mysteries of the Jurassic period. I saw them delighted by mind-blowing factoids, like, the fact that 1,000 Earths can fit inside Jupiter, or the fact that, there are moons out there with seas of methane and, crazy stuff like that. I don't know if all of this will lead them to take an interest in science as a serious pursuit. All I know is that that's what happened with me. At the Science Center, I found what I was looking for in an innocuous little exhibit that consisted of a bunch of metal bars bundled together so that the slightly warmed bars alternated with chilled bars. I touched that bundle of bars and was so surprised and delighted by the sensation that I wanted to grab the passerby and be like, "Dear Lord, you have got to try this!" because it felt white hot. But when I touched the bars individually, they were only slightly warm and cold. I don't know why that particular experience grabbed my interest, but it did. And suddenly, the world was just so unbelievably, beautifully interesting, and I just wanted to know everything about it. I hope that at least one other kid there with me in the Science Center that day felt the same way that I did. Because, honestly, if that sort of emotion is inspired in you, then there's no way that you can think science is boring. There's just no way.